We've got a terrifying monster from outer space. Victims who might as well just salt and pepper themselves. An elite military task force. Lots of black and white PDA. And some sexy monster-on-car action. It's the Creeping Terror, but is it watchable? Thank you, audience sound effect that I purchased a long time ago with a bunch of other sound effects, and welcome everybody to Is It Watchable? I'm your host, Paul. Now, if you love some slow-moving monsters who prey on even slower-moving victims, oh baby, are you in the right place. Monster movies. Since the dawn of motion pictures, people have flocked to theaters to watch creatures from outer space, black lagoons, uncharted islands, and jacked-up science experiments terrorize the unsuspecting public, especially young, attractive women. People just love watching people get eaten, and the cool thing about monsters is that since they don't really exist, no one's ever actually seen one, so filmmakers can make them look like anything. You can say a monster looks fake, but prove it wouldn't have a zipper going up its back. You can't. And so we've gotten an endless parade of movie monsters in all shapes and sizes. There have been people in rubber suits, stop-motion models, puppets, marionettes, and CGI. Or like this movie, 1964's The Creeping Terror, where the monster appears to be a bunch of guys underneath a pile of old blankets, or maybe a homecoming float left out in the rain. One of the worst monsters ever to grace the silver screen. On the other hand, the film does have a pretty clever title, The Creeping Terror. It not only describes the way the monster lurches about, but also the pace of the movie. We open on a darkened highway where Martin, a sheriff's deputy, and his wife are returning home from their honeymoon. We know all this thanks to the narrator because, yep, there's a narrator.
This man's name is Martin Gordon. The lovely girl beside him is Brett, his bride.
Then we get some stock footage of a rocket played in reverse. Next, it's daytime and the sheriff and one of his deputies receive a call about the UFO that landed. But instead of actually hearing their conversation, the narrator tells us what they're saying. Seriously. Out where the spaceship landed, we see that it actually crashed and is on its side and looks absolutely nothing like it did in the stock footage. A flimsy sheet metal door opens and a monster emerges. Then we get a shot of the door closing for some reason. Then back to the monster who's lumbering about like he's drunk or like the holes in that costume aren't big enough. Also keep in mind that every single shot in this movie is about 3 times longer than it should be. Back out on the highway, Martin is still driving with his wife glued to him when the sheriff passes him. So Martin, and for some reason his wife, hop in with the sheriff and head for the crash site. Once there, the narrator tells us how astonished they are.
They looked at the rocket in utter amazement.
After finding a hat that belonged to the county forest ranger, the sheriff decides to go inside the spacecraft to investigate by, crawling underneath it. The next thing we hear is the sheriff screaming in pain over the growling sounds of a creature of some kind. Not wanting any part of that, Martin and his lady hightail it back to the car where Martin calls for some backup. So it's the US Army to the rescue, but first they have to move a tree branch out of the way because someone actually wrote that in the script. When they finally show up at the rocket, a couple soldiers are sent in to check it out, so they hit the dirt and crawl up under it. Look, we know the spaceship has a door, we saw the monster coming out of it earlier, so even if they couldn't open it, which they didn't even try by the way, how does everybody know just to crawl up underneath it to get in? Just let it go. Inside, they see a bunch of 1960s technology, and we see that the aliens use the same number system we do. What a coincidence. But unfortunately, that's not all they find. Outside, they report what they saw to their commanding officer, or at least that's what the narrator tells us. There's no audible dialogue. Back at the sheriff's station, Colonel Caldwell and Martin discuss their strategy, but again, we don't actually hear their conversation. The narrator tells us what they're talking about.
He was to maintain tight security.
It's nearly a minute and a half of exposition where we learn that they want to keep everything under wraps while they await the arrival of a space emissions expert, Dr. Bradford. Later, a young couple is doing some serious making out when the monster shows up. The dude totally bounces, leaving his girl, who apparently decides to hold off to see where this whole thing's gonna go. Bad move, because before you can recite the Gettysburg Address, he's on top of her, sucking her into his gaping vagina-like mouth. And it takes forever to eat her, like plenty of time for her boyfriend to come back and try beating the thing with a large stick or something. Back at the spaceship, Martin is inside taking a look around because the military would totally let a small-town deputy have access to an alien spacecraft they were studying. Outside, he meets up with Deputy Barney and also his wife because I guess somebody's daddy demanded she get more screen time. Next, Dr. Bradford, the scientist they were waiting for, shows up and has a lengthy conversation with Martin, but we don't hear any of it because it's narrated. Later, at Martin's house, he and Barney sneak in to surprise his wife. Barney waits patiently in the living room while the newlyweds suck face in the kitchen. And waits. And waits. When they finally settle down for some drinks, the narrator busts into a full-on 1950s-style educational film about transitioning from bachelorhood to married life.
Since time began, this change in relationship has probably happened to all buddies in similar circumstances. Life has its way of making boys grow up,
Then Martin and his wife start slobbering on each other again, and Barney, not wanting any bodily fluids on his uniform, makes for the exit. Over at the crash site, it's Dr. Bradford's turn to roll under the sheet metal curtain and to marvel at the aliens' use of analog gauges and also the monster inside. Then we meet some random lady named Betty Johnson. After her husband leaves for work, she goes in to check on her baby, takes the baby's temperature, then goes out to hang up some laundry, and then gets eaten by the monster. Except this entire sequence actually takes a whopping 4 minutes to transpire. At the spaceship again, Dr. Bradford is flipping switches and turning dials so that we can see he's busy doing sciencey stuff. Also, all those dial switches and buttons are obviously made for human fingers, and we know what the monster looks like. There's no way it could operate that spaceship. That thing couldn't operate a pair of scissors. Next, we find ourselves creekside as a grandfather and his grandson are fishing. The grandson decides to go for a walk, and when he doesn't return, the grandfather goes looking for him. Unfortunately, the monster is nearby and they both get eaten. After that, a group of people are sitting around listening to some dude play the guitar. As usual, there's a couple making out and they decide to head into the woods for some privacy as everyone wishes them good luck in their sexual adventures. But they don't even get back to first base before the monster shows up. Unable to move away from the slow-moving creature because the movie needs a higher body count, they both get devoured. Hearing the screams, Guitar Man goes to investigate and starts bashing the monster with his guitar. But the monster is impervious to acoustic instruments and eats him along with the rest of the picnickers, who are too weighed down by their sandwiches and soda to make a run for it.
This wholesale disappearance of a large group of people, coupled with earlier missing persons reports, led Martin to only one conclusion. There must be another monster, and it was on the loose.
With bodies piling up, they decide to break into search parties to find the second monster, according to the narrator. But they better hurry because that monster already has his sights set on a dance hall that is really jumping in the middle of the day. What follows is a series of scenes that takes up about 7 minutes of screen time. It's just a bunch of shots of people dancing, intercut with the monster slowly approaching outside, complete with a microplot about a lady who's mad at a guy for some reason. It's like the filmmakers landed a dance hall and a bunch of extras and were hell-bent on getting their money's worth. Finally, the monster shows up. Not sure how he got in, but whatever. Panic ensues, women scream, questions are asked.
My God, what is it?
A fight breaks out as a mob of 3 people try to make it out a single doorway. Facing imminent death, everyone slowly walks backwards towards the exit, but their attempts at survival are in vain and the monster gobbles them up. Since it's been a few minutes since we've seen somebody making out, we next find ourselves at Lover's Lane, where horny teenagers tongue wrestle like it's their last day on Earth. And it just might be because look who's crashing the party. The monster decides to grab some teenagers in a half shell before taking a break to get inappropriate with the car. Then it's on to its next victim, but what's this? The guy actually drives away? That person wins the movie. So the monster moves on to another car where it flips it over to kill its occupants and then flips it over again to suck out all the fleshy goodness. Next, the army shows up in that one truck they have and try to kill the monster by getting real close and shooting at it because they forgot bullets can go far. But if a musical instrument can't take the monster down, there's no way firearms are gonna, and the monster closes in on the soldiers as they slowly back up in one large group to get away. Then they all fall down on top of each other because basic training didn't cover how to walk backwards. Luckily for the monster, that makes them real easy to eat. So Colonel Caldwell decides to use a grenade to blow up the monster, but as he gets close, he falls down and drops a grenade. This movie's not exactly a PR piece for the US Army. But then he picks up the grenade, throws it at the monster, and kills it. I guess all that falling down stuff was for, suspense. Next, Dr. Bradford peels the monster's flesh open to find some wires and some sort of electrical device. This makes him think of stuff, and he hops in the truck after falling down, of course, and heads for the spaceship. Thinking Dr. Bradford might need help, Martin races after him. And then we get an overly long driving sequence that just cuts back and forth between Bradford's truck and Martin's car about half a dozen times. Finally, Dr. Bradford makes it to the spaceship, rushes inside, and then an explosion happens. I don't know. He crawls out injured, and so does the monster inside because the explosion broke its restraints. It kills the one soldier standing guard and then goes after Dr. Bradford. But check it out, my man is a scientist. He figures out that you can just, move away from it. So he does, and before the monster can get any closer, Martin rolls in and rams it with his car, killing it. Dr. Bradford explains to Martin and his wife that the monsters were living laboratories that were consuming humans to analyze their chemical makeup, and that there was a transmitter on the spacecraft that would send the results back to their home planet. So Martin goes into the spaceship to destroy the transmitter by bashing all the sciencey looking stuff with the butt of his gun, and then a metal pole for a really long time. But ultimately he's unable to stop the transmission, and as Dr. Bradford lies dying from his injuries, the 3 wonder about the future of Earth and the people on it. In whatever crazy parallel universe this movie takes place in, if they can't run the away from danger, they're screwed no matter what. The Creeping Terror, like many other bad movies, was almost single-handedly made by one person. In this case, it was Vic Savage, who starred as Deputy Martin Gordon, and who also served as producer, director, and editor under the alias A.J. Nelson. But of course, nobody really cares about Vic Savage. What most want to know is, what the hell's up with that monster? Well, the story goes he actually had a much better monster, but when the special effects guy didn't receive his paycheck, he got mad and stole it the day before shooting began. So they had to hurry up and cobble something together, and the result looked less like a terrifying space creature and more like the appetizer monster from SpongeBob.
Run for your lives, everyone! It's the appetizer!
But guys, I'm not sure I'm buying all that. I mean, unlike many other monster movies that show their creatures sparingly or in quick shots or wait till the end to show them, this monster is in your face. They show it right from the very beginning, from every different angle and in long, lingering close-ups. They love this monster, and you can tell, so I wouldn't be shocked if the whole stolen monster story was just a way for them to cover up their embarrassment. Another infamous lowlight of this movie is the narration. There's almost no dialogue. They show people having conversations, but instead of hearing what they're saying, the narrator tells us what they're saying. It's weird. But apparently there are some stories behind that as well. Depending on who you believe, they either lost the soundtracks or shot the movie without sound to save money. Either way, they reportedly couldn't get everybody back to dub their voices, so they brought in a narrator to fill in the blanks, or almost the entire movie. Finally, I mentioned earlier that this is one of the worst monsters ever to grace the silver screen. Well, the general consensus is that this movie never actually made it to the silver screen, likely not seeing the light of day until it aired on television in the 1970s. So the Creeping Terror, is it watchable? Well, I mean, I do like the monster. That thing's great, and anytime it's on screen, the movie's actually pretty fun to watch, and again, they're not shy about showing it, even coming up with a way to show it actually eating people. How can you not love that? But it's all that other stuff, or really how little other stuff there is. The movie struggles hard to fill time between monster attacks with long scenes of people engaged in voiceless conversation as the narrator drones on and on. People dancing and dancing, people driving and driving, making out and making out. Everything goes on for far too long, which is odd considering the movie is only about an hour and 15 minutes. And if you're thinking you might watch this just to see the monster, why? If you've watched this video or any other video that's covered this movie, you've already seen the best parts. Well, that's it for this video. Join me next time when I check out one of the best sequels ever, Troll 2. And remember, the only way we can keep these videos coming is with your support, so throw us a bone, subscribe.